Hello, everyone. First episode of Interdisciplinary online program on voices affecting change in artworks, books, films, and other media. In the previous episodes, we discussed curating with Tandazani Dhlakama, Kanyisile Mbongwa, and Ethel Rutave. In the second episode, we chatted about women in the struggle with Dr. Barbara Boswell and I do. And the third episode, we discussed the movie Strike a Rock and watch the movie as well. Today, Hanneke Stedt and me will dive deeper into the relationship between mainstream culture production and queer cultural artistic practices and spaces. Hanneke, to you.
Like, what does it mean to produce queerly? What different strategies exist for this? What kind of strategies can we come up with to create space for queer, non-normatively gendered or sexualized voices? How do you go about doing this? Do you take a stand? Do you offer explicitly different perspectives to what people are supposedly used to or what audiences would expect? Do you place footnotes in an otherwise largely heteronormatively organized society in order not to lose a sense of connection and togetherness? Or does one simply adopt an altogether new norm and start broadcasting that as the way to go? Or does one speak, we'll come to this, decline participating in what can be exclusionary feelings of togetherness that stereotypes produce? We have today with us two wonderful people who know all about these questions and I'm sure have thought about this very deeply before. Right, so to ask what is the power of art, what is the power of metaphor, of language, music in questions like these, we have with us today Mia Arderne and Amy Brown. Mia Arderne, welcome, Cape Town-based writer with bylines in New Frame, Mail and Guardian, Vrije Weekblad, Cosmopolitan, Marie Claire, Visie, GQ, City Press and more. Check out her writing, I would say. It explores the politics of gender, race, identity, sexuality, and also mental health. Today, a special focus on her debut novel, Mermaid Fillet, published by Kwela in 2020, which has also been longlisted for the Sunday Times CNA Literary Awards. Martina?
Our second guest is who is Amy Brown. Brown is a singer and songwriter who considers themselves a scribe, being engaged in language in multiple forms. They write music and poetry, but also translate and copyright. Brown has been sharing their art with their city, Cape Town, since 2015. A few years ago, they became the foremost queer women of color to compete in and dominate a local rap battle that resulted in cooperation with the esteemed artists like Jill Levenberg and Jitsvinger. Welcome. I forgot to mention our listeners are very welcome to post their answers for our wonderful guests in the chat, and we will ask them in the Q&A later on. Enjoy and welcome to both our guests.
Perfect. So we'll start by listening to what this is all about. First off, of course, both these word artists, have offered to share some of their work with us. So we'll be doing that first before we go into any further detail. Mia, may I ask you to begin?
Sure, absolutely. So just for some, the passage I'm about to read is from my novel Mermaid Fillet, and it's to do with one particular character called Banghat. Now, for the viewers who don't know the word Banghat, it refers to like a scaredy cat, so like someone who is very scared of everything, is like got no bravery. That's what a Banghat is. So this is about this particular character, and my Banghat character is non-binary and is struggling to assert their non-binariness. So yeah, let me get to reading. When you're at your desk, about to write that final, most important test of your life, and you sit underneath and feel that 2-day-old bubble gum, that's me you're touching. They nodded to themselves, feeling aced. They had almost forgotten who the fuck they were. The girl they followed on Instagram posted that all identities are valid today. Non-binary, pangender, demigender, and gender fluid. They resonated. But what really struck them about the post was how reg she was. Reg, guys, means beautiful. Maybe it was just the validation that was sexy. But they couldn't stop thinking about her now. They wanted to ask people to call them they, but they felt silly doing it. Maybe if they were 3 years younger and at UCT, it would be easier. They used to think they were attracted to hypermasculinity, but they didn't want to fuck it. They wanted to be it. They used to think they were attracted to hyperfemininity, but they didn't want to fuck it. They wanted to be it too. And now they didn't want to be either. They were already both, and boldly so. Inside and in the way they moved through the world. How can I take myself seriously and ask people to call me they, them, they wondered. Imagine asking Ma. They dismissed the thought. I know who I am. Why can't I ask for it? Maybe it was the plurality of the pronoun. They sometimes found it clumsy. They felt bad asking. Maybe they were just a bangat. They lacked the confidence to assert who they are. But others had done it. They'd seen it being done. Why can't I? Pondered the bangat. They scrolled through her Insta. Björn Sterk. They DM'd the girl they liked. The woman they smirked strickend, which means liked a lot. The queen they'd come to love. Totally out of their league. This was the girl of their dreams. They slid into her DMs. They were tougher than they realized they could be, and hungrier than they'd ever been for the impossible. Tough enough to kidnap a Malnai. Tough enough to chase even. Chase means to pursue romantically. To slide into the DMs of an influencer. And so they left to be alive, resolute. They were a dropped stitch in the fabric of society. They waxed their chin hairs, dabbed on pale opaque base, blood lips. Today they were that bitch. They tweezed the strays around their areolas. They applied facial oil, but they were too wired to massage it in with their fingertips. They were too rough with their skin. They were doing more damage than good, walking between the creases of her middle fingertip. They knew, I am that bitch. Big dick energy at its purest was neither femme nor masculine. And that's it.
Awesome. I want to applaud, but my hands are full. Thank you so much for this. I love that you chose this passage from Movement Fillet. I think it's very typical of the way you write there as well. Like it's like you say, it's femme and masculine at the same time. It's funny but also deep. So thank you for that. This last line, right? So that is, I think, almost like a header. We can use this maybe for thinking about queer stereotypes. Big dick energy at its purest was neither femme nor masculine. Forgive me if this is a bit of perhaps a simple question, but if you like thinking about this passage, how important exactly? I know there's other characters in the book that have different types of sexualities, different types of identities. How important was it for you? How much at the forefront of your mind was it for you to think about queer issues while you were writing Movement Fillet?
Well, it was quite important to me because I identify as queer myself, and I think there's an underrepresentation of a host of queer identities. So, for example, I have an asexual character and a character, and I've got a bisexual character.
lost Mia for a moment. Mia, are you back? Can you hear us? Seems you have lost sound. We can't hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Brown, will you be willing to share your artwork, your writing now, and then maybe we can get back to Mia later on once her sound issues are sorted? Great, thank you very much.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hi sis, it's always Pride Month in our house. He said that she said she deserves an apology because she said that he said he's averse to equality, pervert the dichotomy, rework the psychology, then take turns finding words for the hurt that is following. And honestly, when you call love, do you mean all love? Do you mean pure love? Do you mean all of the above? Or do you mean your love? Do you think it's physical? Have you deemed it clinical? Do you preach it's biblical? Because I've seen it's spiritual. You're a girl. Here's to the lovers among us, to the unloved others among us, those who were smothered but overcome the covers. Mama, I pray for the haters, for the debaters, for the naysayers, and celebrate with the makers of the safest of spaces. Jesus, forbade with the misogynist apologists with a modern twist, more bothered with my wobble bits and orifice. The hollowness is hard to swallow, miss. They say that we're deviants. They say that it's greediness. But Queen, the category is nothing you've ever seen on TV, real ET glitz. And if you're seeing this, what I really list is that you go out and experience. Go find the free that's in your freakiness. Because love is more than a theory just passed down. Query gods, Brown. Thank you.
Thanks, Brown. That's really awesome. Thanks for sharing us that with us today. Again, here, sort of taglines, maybe. Right? If you forgive me for speaking like stereotypically like that, but it's just both of you have this way of sort of pumping out phrases that just sort of stick in your brain and then help you think further, right? So, as you say in the poem, pervert the dichotomy, rework the psychology. Right, so can you say maybe a little bit more about those lines? Would you care to comment in how that relates maybe for you to queerness?
I mean, I would love I would love nothing more than to comment, actually. I think what I mean is that we definitely worship at the altar of like the mind space of knowledge, of particularly academic standards of knowledge and information. For me, I realized that when we get into this headspace where we are trying to, in this case, infiltrate modern culture, when in actuality queerness is as ancient as everything else, then it becomes a battle of words, a battle of the wits, a battle of how do we phrase it, and becomes more the calling of things than the doing of things, and humanity somehow gets lost for me within like the stratification of these things. I feel like they are identity which are more welcome, and then there are parts of identity, the spectrum which are not as welcome. I think Mia was relating to that before we lost about the importance of just representing these things. So for me, outside of the word part, that's what I mean when I'm saying we understand what it is, but then we pervert these things for our own outcomes or means sometimes. By we, I mean the royal we. Or
No, absolutely. Thanks. Mia, can you hear us now? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to check the sound.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
You can? Awesome.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for
Perfect.
solving that. Martina, do you have another question for Brown?
I just, you are totally right, like the words and the one-liners, and they're just there. And I just totally got stuck on the word deserving, like, and that's the whole point, isn't it? Like, queer deserves a space. Then what Mia says, like, why can't I ask for it? It's like, yes, deserving, and then claiming the space, claiming in words or any other way. But it's a comment. It's not really a question. I'm just working through it. I will have questions later on, I guess. I will type them in the chat.
Mia, we lost you just when you were answering the first question about your performance. Would you be so kind as to repeat?
Sure, yeah. So I'm not sure exactly where you lost
Pretty much
me.
at the start. So I think the question was really sort of to what extent the notion of queerness is at the forefront of your mind, or was, when you were sort of thinking about these differently, if I may say so, sexualized, for lack of a better word maybe, characters.
Yeah, sure. So so for the non-binary typically, I think that one can be non-binary without necessarily assuming a particular set of pronouns. And I think that for that character, because that Bangat is an older character, that non-binary identity of being called can be a bit more difficult to assert, because you're not growing up in that environment of queer-friendly language that's happened with the younger generation. So this is a character struggling with that because they haven't been brought up with that acceptance and that, culture that we see in today. So I thought that was a little struggle to found.
Brown, but Mia has sort of at the beginning of the novel there is a character list that names all the different characters, and then it has information like name, age, some of them sexual orientation, some of them vices or mental health issues, but also where they're from and star signs, right? So maybe this to some extent already ties to what you were saying too, Brown, about sort of the humanity of it all being so incredibly important in how these things are talked about and foregrounded, right? So this notion of the list, Mia, I was wondering, would you care to comment further on that?
Sure. So right at the beginning of Mermaid Philip, there's this list of characters, and each character has these qualities. So there's an asexual character. The asexual character's age and what their vice is, like whatever it is, and their mental illness, which in this case is depression. Then there's another character who is bisexual, who's a killer, and whose vice is alcoholism. And there's a pansexual character who's a much younger character, and she has social anxiety that she suffers from. And so in that list, my thinking was the reader could always go back and look at these characters, their vices, their sexual orientations, and see, the bit of background that accompanies them as the reader goes along. So you introduce to these characters where they come from. So some of them come from Bala, Kales River, wherever, which I don't know if you know these places, but they're all suburbs in Cape Town. So you have an immediate gaze into their world before you even start reading the book. And so I think it was also quite important to me to represent that spectrum of queerness and sexual orientation right from the get-go.
Awesome. I mean, that ties in, I think, of course, with the sort of theme for today, like the title for today's sessions. It's called Queering the Stereotype, right? So for one, I was quite triggered by this this idea of the list, because it is maybe a way in which we tend to categorize our knowledge, as Brown mentioned earlier. But then this can also be used perhaps to positive ends, and that sort of relates to part of what we wanted to talk about today. So what we would like to do, just to further the conversation a little bit, is go through 3 short quotes by a French cultural theorist called Mireille Rosello. The book is from 1998, and it's called Declining the Stereotype. Right, and in this book, sort of, this person offers strategies or theories, although theories is also something to be careful with, as Brown mentioned in their performance as well. Right, but sort of ideas of how to deal with stereotypes, stereotyping oneself, but also being stereotyped, and how to go about maybe declining that invitation to stereotype. So from what I've understood, these quotes will also appear in the chat for our viewers, and I've got 3 of them. I'll just go through them here. So the first one really sort of explains the basic idea, I think, of the book, which when I was reading it at the time was quite eye-opening, for me at least, even perhaps growing up in a queer city of Amsterdam, nonetheless being often stereotyped in many, many ways, implicitly or explicitly, right? So the first one is that Rosello says, the paradoxical violence of stereotypes uttered in public is that they are often presented as a chance to make us prove our loyalty to the speaker, but also as an opportunity to be accepted as part of a group. Here is an open invitation to belong, to be welcomed by a supposedly unanimous community. Right, so this basic idea of sort of the stereotype as something that ties people together, that people have as a sort of communal strategy amongst themselves, thinking perhaps that this is harmless, and also extending this to others who might not feel that such stereotypes are as harmless. Then there is also some conversation or some discussion in the book of why the stereotypes persist, why these stereotypes continue to be so prevalent in our society. And this is from later in the book. The first quote was from the introduction. This is, I believe, from the first chapter, where Rosello mentions that because of their strong iterative force, stereotypes travel from mouth to mouth, from text to text, from discipline to discipline, without losing much of their original shape and strength. As if parasites themselves, they need not worry about the deterioration other statements suffer from circulation and transmission processes. Right, so the theory, or at least sort of the point that Rosello, I think, is trying to make here is that the more you mention the stereotype, the stronger it gets, and the more it will sort of circulate. So the first point is sort of the stereotype creates a community, either wanted or unwanted. The second point is really a possible explanation of why stereotypes are so hardy. And the third one, perhaps in terms of the word artists, the specialists in language that we have with us here today, is the third quote, which says that remembering that stereotypes are also, or perhaps above all, a manifestation of what is mechanical in our language. I will treat declensions as an interesting combination of fixed roots and variable endings, as a crossroads where form and function meet and where the principles of sameness and difference are united as two aspects of the same reality. So here, declining really means paying attention to the relationship between one word and the rest of the sentence. So what am I doing with this stereotype, and how can I sort of twist it around in different ways? So this is perhaps a bit much, but Mia, Brown, we'd be really curious to hear whether you agree or disagree with these three bits, one of them, and whether you see sort of overlaps or stark differences with your own work or practice. Who would like to go first, Brown?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to share. I do think that something that stands out for me is this idea that these things are co-created, essentially. So enough people basically agreeing that this thing is the way, that this is the case. But then also, I get the sense that this is also only reflective of a certain kind of communication, where certain people, in the case maybe academics or people making, people who actually have the ability to put something in a textbook, and actually apply, because we're not talking about word of mouth here, we're talking about institutionalized, intentional mechanisms to insist that these things persist, which is the case, which is true, and probably sounding when you think about like a more decentralized idea of how it's on or how identities get formed. So for me, it really stood out that what I acknowledge and agree with is that we definitely all have to agree on it. Enough people just doing it with enough of a pool. In the case of where we're living now, I don't suppose that in 1998 there was as much of a influence on social media and the way things are moving to actually to see how something gets, maybe in this case, tweeted and retweeted and moved along. Also in a space where we are like inundated with viewpoints and a more diverse, not so much a linear way of thinking about things. Particularly in the queer context, I think that it's the same thing. Queerness in itself is now in the, let's say, perceived modern idea of queerness to also be a co-created thing like gender, this idea that men are like this and women are like this. So that fundamental break, where we go from just stories being told to stratifying stories into queer stories or female stories or male stories, so I think that the declining comes from the co-agreed upon thing that this is the pool of information that we kind of kowtow to. And with that being said, we have to decline the stereotype. But in a lot of cases, for the actual doers and the people on the fringe, this might just be Wednesday. It may not be so much of a protest. I'm also feeling like, obviously, I only filtered it through my own experience and my own creative process, and understanding that even within my co-expression, there are normatives, and therefore I can fall victim to the same type of stereotyping if I internalize that. Whether I internalize patriarchy or I internalize misogynoir, that I think is something that also is very real, because we don't just pass it through from word to word, we also take it back home into our domestic situations. And then that becomes the code that we use for all communication, So I do think that even now, even in the social media more so, I see this, was he a philosopher, anthropologist, I think? I see how that's still very pertinent to how we are, and even more allowing that this is to literally be viral in our context now. It can literally go viral in the way that he's talking about this parasite. We literally see the effects of those things, and even more so now are able to quantify how a stereotype moves by a certain amount of people who have reposted or have engaged with that. Whereas I'm assuming more of like someone on a soapbox type of, you don't even it kind of comes through more in the lines of, the effect is so much more severe, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
What do you think, Mia? Also in relation to what Brown was saying about social media.
Yeah, I think Brown makes an excellent point. So I think what happens on social media quite often is there's this performativity, like a performance of gender, a performance of stereotypes, a performance of being progressive. And that performance is quite stereotypical itself. That is we have to be quite honest about, because to what degree are we perpetuating stereotypes ourselves? To like a story, because my as a storyteller. What we need to maybe move away from, tell stories, whether it's film or novel or whatever, to have queerness just be a part of the story, not the central thing. Like, instead of creating a story about, just have it be there, have it be normal. Here are queer characters, everyone's carrying on about their lives, there's drama, there's, queerness shouldn't be, it should be so normalized that it doesn't have to be centralized, that we don't have to focus an entire story on a queer struggle, because it shouldn't be that way anymore. So that's my type down so much that queer characters exist as the norm without the very foreground of the story, because why should it be when it's just as normal as any other? Like, we would, for example, now the whiteness of this man, so in the same light, why should we?
We should, though.
Yeah.
Oh, what comes to my mind, stereotype is very much a social contract, isn't it? Like, it's something like majority, which is a very not very inclusive term. The majority just decides on what is a stereotype, and then it goes like a whole sets of meanings, and then it is imposed on people, whether you like it or not. And I think you're totally right, Brown, and Mia agrees as well. It's just like, now we have maybe a chance to queer the stereotype. We can work with it, something that has been imposed upon us without our having a say in it. But I'm just wondering, is there a way, how can we actually really queer it and make it work for us, not against us? So that stereotype is not an exclusionary practice, but something that is a positive, productive thing. Anyone?
I mean, if I may, I was thinking about what Mia was saying about kind of normalizing this idea of queerness, and very often find myself being referred to as a queer creator. So I go into places and people, particularly non-queer identifying bodies, who also hold space, which is the way, because the representation and visibility gets so blurred. It's like, because you see me doesn't mean you're representing me necessarily. So my feeling is that when I'm called a queer creator, that in my head is like stratifying me. If I call myself a queer creator, it's because I'm identifying that and I'm using the adjective, I'm a queer creator. And it's a fine line, because if you are wanting to represent, and there are certain nuances that need to be, and even to call it nuances is problematic, but I think you know what I mean. The gist of it is it's more gray than just that. So on the one hand, I do understand how we can intellectualize queering the stereotype, but at the crux of it, for all of these things to be, for a stereotype to be a stereotype, and a queer stereotype to not live on the outside of the realm of stereotypes, so that it becomes again the human factor. So how do we ensure that all voices are given the same scope, that all stories are given the same value? And then maybe I do think there's this make it work for you definitely element, especially when you in my everyday, the way commerce and art meet each other. There's definitely the temptation to lean into these things, and then participate in othering yourself, because it's easy and it's comfortable and it's lucrative. Every June companies have rainbows, and then slowly, so I almost have to keep reminding myself and checking myself to be like, I am normal. My stories are valid and real and ancient as anything else. And yeah, I think there is a way where certain people in certain realms with what do I want to call it? The privilege of a certain thought process, you can say, make the stereotype work for you. But when you're dealing with the general mass people who actually need to benefit from the artivism, then maybe it's a little bit tricky,
Absolutely. Thanks for that. Mia, in your case, I heard at least, like one resonance, sort of let's say the co-opting of queerness, or the co-opting of sexuality, like looking at your writing, but maybe also your paintings. right? It seems to me this is something you're also interested in. Sort of the dynamic between those two. Consumerism maybe, and sort of how that relates to identity formation.
Yeah, well, I think today especially there is a link between performed queerness and consumerism. I mean, it's like Brown was saying, like you'd get like banks and sneaker brands just chucking a rainbow on their logo or on their shoe or on their wall. And it's just this, it's lip service. It's not really, I mean, I for one don't buy that they're doing any real change. They're not like, they're not going into areas where queer people are being killed, are being marginalized. It's just a way for them to like, you know, latch onto that bandwagon. So I think that, and that's what capitalism does, right? It mutates, and then it mutates to hold our interest and to keep up with what's going on. So yeah, that is definitely something that I'm aware of, and I think a lot of us are aware of it. Like we see through what's going on there, and it's. I don't know. I mean, that's how I feel about it. Maybe other people see that and they feel like it is a more inclusive space as a result. So I can't speak in a generalized sense. I think that I kind of see it as that. I kind of see it as, like, I can't remember where I was at the waterfront, and I can't remember, I think it was a bank, but they had the rainbow lights like all over the roof. I was like, man, I know you guys don't care. Like, I know you don't. Quite cynical when it comes to consumerism. Just like it's like they're sticking a rainbow on it and saying, "Yeah, buy it," and they charge double the price. And yeah, that's the strategy.
Maybe I'm playing a little bit of a devil's advocate here, and like I'm basically on your side, what you both just said, but. Then as you were talking, I was also thinking consumerism is always such a powerful way to make something quotidian and sort of everyday, right? In a way, sort of. So maybe this is also, it's really an open question and not at all a contra, I'm with you, right? But it also makes me think, like, how difficult is it to come up with strategies that don't do that? You catch my drift.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a valid point. Look, it does. It makes it ubiquitous, and that's also quite important. So I think, yeah, I mean, I have a bit of a distrust about it, but at the same time, it does normalize. It does a lot of that. So that's.
I mean, for me, I always even noting something spaces. They talk about safe spaces for certain bodies. I'm like, buying into safe spaces means I'm accepting that something can be unsafe. And so now I have to kind of traverse these two options. So it's like the stereotype, then it's like, how are we buying into that the norm is the norm? You know, and I don't mean to think we can actually erase that the way things are. But even to say normalize means that it isn't a normal thing, and it is. It's just been positioned in a way where it isn't spoken about, and that just means for that one campaign, you know, or that one service provider, however it may be. I agree with you. There's a way of normalizing it, but also queer culture, aesthetic lexicon is always at the forefront of non-queer expression. So queer culture does make it to the mainstream. Just the queer bodies don't.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I think that's an excellent point, which ties in, I think, to another thing that's really important, or seems to me, in both your work, and I believe you also have a question about this, Martina, which is about the specificity of place, and sort of the role of place in how you come to your art.
I do have a question about that, but
not now.
I think Not now. Yeah, no, but I'm totally like stuck again in my head with the term like queer washing. You know, there's greenwashing, like companies doing like we're so green, we're so ecological, and there seems to be the same thing happening with rainbow flags or whatever. Like, you know, queer is just something that sells. Thanks God, it's not nudity anymore, but still, it's just it's just a selling technique, isn't it? But can we go back maybe to more cultural artistic spaces, and can you see some development in the way how queerness is in those spaces? So the not business like situations. Do you have something to say about that? Like, do you see a development in the last?
Well, I mean, I certainly have. I've seen more queer voices potentially than ever before. So I think there has been a new space created for it. I think it's largely due to generation that is not pandering to being kind of shut down, shut up. You know, I think that there's been quite a serious change where queer voices are heard. And then I think it kind of comes down to a class issue where the voices that are heard, the queer voices that are generally of a middle and higher class. And so we have a lack of queer voices from working class and disenfranchised queer people. For me, that's quite a pertinent issue. But on the whole, I think there are more queer voices represented in the last 2 years.
Sorry for interrupting, guys, but we have some delay on the line. So if we can just hold 1 second, the stream needs to catch up.
Sure.
Yeah, we're good. We're good, thank you. Brown?
Yeah, as for representation, definitely I agree completely with Mia. It's not like there haven't been voices. I just also think that more independent art is happening. So anyone with a smartphone can also be creating art and be telling their story. So it does open up and kind of level. It's a very like sobering level where everybody gets to be seen and heard, whether or not that can be translated into like positive representation, I think is where we're at. I think I don't think it's like queer voices are coming to the light. I feel like there's a revival that's happening because there's always been a queer narrative. I just think that now it's about finding what that representation looks like, because I'm also noticing a move towards like a hypersexualizing of queer culture, or maybe just ball culture, or maybe just like the aesthetic appeal. Again, I think it plays into the consumerism thing. And then in terms of in terms of mine and Mia's like context, the South African context, having also the nuance, not just be queer voices, having the racial layer to it, and knowing that there are more brown, feminine, all these type of voices moving, I think is also has had a lot to do with accelerating representation in our particular place, you know.
Brown, you just mentioned space, and that now I get to ask my question about space, because like both work so much localized in Cape Town specifically. Mia, there is the difference in Mermaid Fillet between Letitia and Michaela. Letitia, like being described as someone who could not see the mountain from where she grew up, and then Michaela, who just is right there next to the mountain, definitely illustrating the class difference. Brown, you all very much naming yourself a Cape Townian artist, so Cape Town is also a very important part of your work. Can you maybe address the intersection of space and class in the work of both of you?
I mean, for me, part of part of the Cape Townianness of it, because I mean I am a anglicized body. I do have English as my mother tongue, but also part of the protest about what I'm doing is also insisting on the multilinguistic nature of what Cape Town brings. I've also resisted the urge to hyper enunciate things in a more anglicized way, and I mean that's just what I sound like. So I'm not like saying that it took work, but I think that when it comes to place and for me representation, all of these intersectionalities, including languages like Gael and Sabela, and I've been reading Mermaid Philip again, and that's something that stood out for me was we are so welcomed into spaces when we are prepared to conform and bend into these things, and the choice to not do that, the choice to actually say this is centralizing Cape Town, but not just for the view, because it's easy to just pick one part of the city to use, the landscape, but not the ugliness, or only the gangsterism, but not the beauty of the ancient history. So I think that, that for me is I think as much of a protest as choosing to have queer narrative and queer characters is also to fully see the city for what it is. And then also allow, and definitely in Mermaid Philip, the city is like a character in itself. She kind of, Cape Town holds this, the shenanigans, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dan. So yeah, like Cape Town is one of the most segregated cities in the world, the country. That's just what it is. So I mean, the two characters, Michaela and Letitia, live in very different Cape Towns. Letitia doesn't have access to views, but more than that, like Letitia doesn't have access to mental health resources. She doesn't have access to language around feminism. She doesn't have access to tertiary education. She doesn't have access to any of that shit that Michaela has access to. So when you're looking at things like identity politics, like and healing from trauma, Michaela is just in a way better position to heal from that stuff, express herself than Letitia is, and that is as a direct result of class, place, and segregation. And I think that is what happens in Cape Town to everyone. I mean, possibly in a lot, but I think particular because of our spatial apartheid being so intense in Cape Town, it's kind of more highlighted.
No, absolutely. I think in that sense too, sort of I think the grammars, the languages, the strategies that one can develop. I wouldn't say it's maybe it is more difficult. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but definitely, let's say less accessible. Maybe also community dependent. Who is used to speak about which issues and who is not. I'm not saying that that is also an issue of race or segregation, right? But it's maybe also sometimes the case that environments where there's a lot of abuse in whatever form, plays into these issues. I'm tempted to check, you guys, whether there is already some questions in the chat. There's one here. I hear. With a bit of, do you have it ready? Because there's someone, you guys can't see this, but we have a question in the room. Like we can also just, Bianca, you can also just come here and ask it, actually. Yeah. Let's do that. This was improvisation, sorry. For the technical team, I apologize. I will make this up later. But it's good to have live questions, so here we go.
Hi,
yeah.
Hi, it's Mia Arderne. I'm a librarian here at Zuid-Afrikahuis. I don't know why.
Bianca, kom hier.
Hi, I'm just going to stand here and and hug Hanneke. My name is Bianca. I'm the librarian here at the Zuid-Afrikahuis, and I've been very much looking forward to this episode since yeah, I'm quite intrigued by both Amy's work and also a big fan of Mermaid Valet. And I was wondering when I just a little bit after I read Mermaid Valet, I read a book from Zoe Wickham, and I saw some parallels there. 1 second. I'm talking about Playing in the Light, and there is a victim of sexual abuse imagining to be a mermaid while staring at the glistering on the water surface of the ocean, and yeah, to her it appears to be a mermaid appears to her as being safe and to be as if it's the ultimate freedom, because as a mermaid you don't have genitals. So I was wondering if that is a link with, I mean, why are there mermaids? Why are they being chopped up in the book and everybody wants to eat them? And I mean, is this a coincidence or is this intertextuality?
Okay. Well, firstly, I'm ashamed to say I've never read Zoe Wickham, which I know I need to. And I'm quite a poor reader, and I haven't read that. And it sounds really interesting, and I will give it a shot. So it's not an intertextual reference. It's kind of the opposite. So when these women turn into mermaids, they are growing a tail because they are so traumatized and so depressed, unable to move, and their legs slicing together because of inaction, and eventually they die. So it's the opposite of having be and having no genitals, and there's a freedom, you know, away from being a sexual abuse survivor. It's kind of the opposite in the sense that you've given in to sexual trauma, and it's confined you to such a degree that you can no longer walk or move in the world. And then you get traded on the black market like crayfish and sold and eaten. So it's kind of the way that society kind of discards victims of sexual abuse. It's more indicative, I would say, of that.
Second, there is a lag. I'm waiting for the thumbs up. Yeah, we're good. Excellent. So, Brown, you mentioned just now that you were talking about sort of being an Anglophone body, if I heard you correctly, right? I wanted to ask both of you about the use of language in the language that you use. Not as exciting a question as the mermaid one, perhaps, but nonetheless, I think an important one, because if I may project towards our viewers, maybe readers, at least the readers that I know, says maybe more about me, are not so used to carbs in English, if I may say it like that. And I was wondering if you could say about sort of how that language, what that means to you, and why you write in that language, or whether you see it as more languages or just the one.
Yeah. I mean, definitely Cape Town as a result of like historical events, multilinguistic kind of station or like factory shop for lots of things. Also, Kaaps, even the idea of like Afrikaans not actually legitimately including Kaaps is problematic. Afrikaans is definitely only later being like standardized to, you know, it's Kaaps. Afrikaans is actually a more diverse, way more transcendent language than what it's officially known as. So definitely Kaaps, for me, is a way of acknowledging that. I was saying I'm definitely anglicized. I come from a family where English is the first language, predominantly so. I am bilingual, obviously, for my work, but also even in my family construct, my multilingualism is protest. So, yeah, the choice to do it. I also think there's a. I was actually at the club. I was in the Joel, and I was watching brown folks singing Despacito. You know that song? And I was like, okay, these are my people going through a lot of effort to listen to and understand Despacito. And the world got very tiny to me in that second. I was like, we have just traveled across the continent and I'm still in the jail in Long Street. And I think that if that story can be valid, then somebody can be reading Mermaid Fillet and knowing, understanding, and also wanting to know, because then in that way we also are kind of making that story a valid story. I think language carries validity because stereotypically English is easier to understand or easier to whatever, and I don't think that is the truth. So for me, it's a choice to do that, and that's before even getting into loveliness like Gael, which is a language that is created by the gay community, and Sabela, language that gangsters speak, and in themselves also carry class markers and also carry, messages and sub messages, as it were. So it's partially in between it's partially for me between, excuse me, want kids to know that the way they sound and what they have to say is important and valid, but also it's we can also frankly expect more from consumers of art. Like, we really can. And I don't think English always does that. I think there's a comfortable realm where this is acceptable and everything else is somehow on the fringe, as if there aren't millions of people engaging. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, so I agree with that so much. I mean, like one of the comments I got from an international reader was, why didn't I include a glossary? And my argument is, why must I? Like, you go find out what these words mean. Why can't I be unapologetically Caps? This is how my community speaks, my family, it's the school I went to, it's familiar to me, you know? And I think level, their words are just like, you can't explain them in English. Like the word jazz, for example, there are so many different meanings to it that English is just not going to cut it. It's not going to do it. And so it's not even so much a deliberate choice, but just that it fits what I'm trying to say, and it does so in an organic way. And so that's kind of more really why I opted to write in caps.
and we're good. Martina, do you have any questions?
I will have questions like half an hour later when I just have digested this amazing conversation we had. Maybe we spoke about space and place, but not really nature, and ecological activism, ecological engagement is present in both of your works. So maybe we could talk a bit about that.
Who would like to go first? Someone who writes for climate change or someone who has goddesses rain blood on cities? Where to begin?
Okay, let me start.
Yeah,
So,
you're the goddess,
yeah.
the goddess raining type.
My goddess
Nourishing seas.
blood, menstrual blood on sexual abuse. I'm not sure if that's an ecological statement, but I mean, for me, it's it was the idea of the elements being retributive. So there's retribution in the elements. Yeah, and then I mean, the idea of mermaids as well. I think that there is always this need to eat the rarest thing, like abalone, like crayfish, which are going extinct, but there's a rarity about them. And it's cultural as well, and that's what you want because that's what you grew up with, and it doesn't matter that it's red listed. So I think maybe it touches on that, but it was quite incidental actually that it did. I didn't go out trying to comment on but I did want the goddess that rained down menstrual blood and killed sexually just because I wanted that.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, ecology and from a indigenous knowledge system in an African context, like storytelling is just the same as going to university, and so it's less of a including ecology and more of part and parcel of the storytelling process is that you are in that place and almost usually culturally first acknowledging like the actual like where your feet are planted on. So definitely, I mean, in terms of like the brief, there are ways in which we're phrasing it, and definitely climate writing and the way in which I'm influenced by, and also my closest ancestors got here by way of waves and oceanic voyaging actually. So yeah, I feel like the ecology is us, and so it's bound to come out. Yeah.
Another sec. Yeah, we're good. I've also been notified there's another question from the room. So I'm going to hand over the microphone. There might not be image, but please bear with us 1 sec.
Hi, my question is actually a very, very short question, and unfortunately, it's nothing to do with the environment, so we'll have to take a little step back. But so, Brown, you write in English, so I suppose this doesn't entirely apply to you. But Mia, you mixed caps. So I would say I read Mireille. I really enjoyed it, and it was written in English with caps included every now and then. Perhaps for words which couldn't really be translated into English. But I wonder, do you plan to, or have you written a piece which is entirely in caps, or because caps does have a lot of English thrown in, but with like, let's say, majority caps Afrikaans?
Well, look, I think caps does involve both English and Afrikaans. Caps is a mix of both. So, and you can get like a version of caps that is more English, and there's a version of caps that is more Afrikaans. But they are equally versions of caps. Is the way that I would explain it. So I think what you're asking, have I written a piece that is more Afrikaans and caps, which I haven't. The caps that I use is an more English version of caps. So there is, I think they both exist, but caps, I mean, by definition, is a combination that involves both English and Afrikaans words. So it can lean to either side depending on the speaker. And like, I think Brown can comment on this as well, because their poetry involves caps as well. So I don't know if you think there, Brown.
Yeah, I think it relates to what you were saying earlier. If for the context that from, it's not even a code switch. It's not even a mental choice to say, I'm going to say this in this language as if you were translating something from one space to another. This idea of Capetonian identity, Brown Capetonian identity, is that part and parcel with it, is this kind of fluidity, if you will, about the language. You just go in with a story in mind, and then however the voice in my head says it, that's how I say it.
Thanks, you guys. I think we're running close to out of time. But before we go, by way also of, because saying goodbye is hard, right? So we're not just going to just say goodbye. Let's just ask you guys, what are you working on now? What are your, do you have, apart from the fact that you simply and clearly love to create, do you have hopes for your work? What makes you happy? What pushes you forward? There's lots of questions in one phrase.
Yeah, well, okay.
Brown, go for it.
It is a loaded question. my happiness definitely correlates to the amount, like the enough free time to actually just like enjoy the sunshine and write things that make me feel good and don't just pay bills. So I do, for me, definitely hope that there's more of that. And for anybody creating, I do, for us all, want just a reality where just the stories that make you feel lekker get to be, the thing that even allows to sustain. That's definitely my hopes. Yeah, and I'm also looking forward to more opportunities to kind of, there's a constant gamble as a kid, getting excited about the opportunity to kind of double down on the bets that I've been making on myself, and then just looking forward to eating the fruits.
Yeah, so it's a tough one because I struggle to get inspiration to write, and I have been. So I'm not going to act like there's this massive drive pushing me to create at the moment, because there just isn't. But what I have been working slowly on is a young adult piece of fiction. So with a young adult novel, it's not as heavy and as it doesn't look at such hectic themes of abuse, and so there's some levity in writing in that vein compared to the work that I've done in the past, which allows me to live in a slightly lighter headspace. So I'm quite happy about that.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, for sharing your work, for sharing your time with us, both of you. I hope, of course, our audience feels the same. Again, my hands are full, but you are much thanked, much appreciated, and much loved here at the Zuid-Afrikahuis in Amsterdam. And hopefully we'll be in touch. And see you next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having us. This was fun.
Thank you very much for joining us today.